Hello, I'm Pauline Watson. Francisco Watson happens to be my maiden name. I was born January 24, 1921, in uh, Marquis, that's spelled Marquis, Saskatchewan, Canada. Marquis is about 25, 26 miles north and west of Moose Jaw. Moose Jaw, of course, being on the southern, more towards the southern end of the province. I left Marquis and came to Nebraska and lived with my grandparents and graduated from the Scottsbluff High School in 1942. Now that you can't look at my date I graduated and figure out my age because I was over 20 years old when I graduated. And the reason being, the very first year in school, my dad moved me to my granddad's house where they lived. My mom and dad decided that they were taking their grandson to school. They could also take me to school in the wintertime with the snow and horses and a sleigh to get there, and they lived closer to their school. So it would be better if Pauline came and lived with them and go to school. Grandpa could take me along with my cousin William. The teacher said she thought I was visiting, that I was not a student, so consequently I flunked. And then there was one year I just rebelled and said I wasn't going to go to school, and I didn't. So I missed 1 year of going to school. And,
When did you move to the States?
in October of 1940, 42.
Moved to Nebraska?
No, 41, because I graduated from high school at 42.
So you went to high school in Canada?
Yes, yeah, I was going to school in Canada, came in October, and came by Greyhound bus with my dad to my grandparents that lived at Mitchell, Nebraska, and I stayed with them and finished up my high school year. And
So you did the majority of your schooling in Canada.
right.
In what town in Canada?
In Marquis, Marquis.
Okay. What do you remember about Canada?
School was very, very different. There was no such a thing as a semester. In other words, at the end of the year, you took a test, and it was a government. Now this is what we would call grade 9 through 12. There was no such a thing as a test that a teacher would give you that made any difference. Of course, their tests would help you to pass. The provincial test that everybody in the province, in other words, if you were studying French and you was in grade, say, 11, everybody across the whole province of Saskatchewan would be taking their French test the same day, the same hour.
Mhm.
That way, and your teacher saw to it that you would not cheat. Your books were bound. There were certain pages that they would ask you to refer to, and of course those were open where you could look at that kind of thing up if there was something like that on your test.
What did your father do in Canada?
My dad was a farmer, wheat farmer, and and of course we had the Depression and the Dust Bowl, the Russian thistles blowing. It was gross. I mean, the Russian thistles were huge, big old tumbling weeds.
And that occurred when you were in Canada?
That was in Canada, and the sand, the dirt was blowing. The weeds would get lodged in a fence somewhere along a road, you know, and then the weeds would fill up with sand, and pretty soon you could walk across the fence because of the weeds and then the weeds being full of sand, and there was that was the Dust Bowl days.
Anything else you remember about Canada when you were up there?
Well, school was very, very different. I mean, when you took your test at the end of the year, there would be things on that test that you learned maybe the first day you went to school in the fall. In other words, you had to remember and know everything that you studied from the day you started in the fall until
Retaining
you
or
took your final in May.
comprehension.
School did get out in May.
Okay.
Oh, and while you're in 9, 10, 11, 12 grade, it cost you $1 to take your test. And the test, your teacher took your test, put it in an envelope, and sealed it. And then they were mailed to the provincial government, and there was people there, teachers, I would assume, that read your exam and graded it. In other words, and there was no such a thing as a graduation. You don't know whether you even passed until after your test in this sealed envelope was opened in the provincial, capital, which would be Regina in my case. Your test was opened and was read, and then the results was mailed to you. That's when you found out if you passed.
Okay. Well, thank you, Pauline, for sharing. Anything else you want to say before we...
School was easier in Nebraska.
Was it?
Much easier. In fact, when I went in October of 41 to get started in the 12th grade, they were taking a history of what I had studied in Canada. And the principal of the school says, Pauline, he says, it looks to me like we're going to have you graduating before you even start. So, with French, chemistry, trigonometry, algebra, geometry, literature, English. I mean, it was different. And so when I came to Nebraska to go to school, guess what? I had not had anything like typing, business, law, and foods, housekeeping, homemaking. I had had none of that kind of schooling, so I took a Foods 1 class, which was usually the ninth graders that were coming into the school, and so here I was as an elders grade 12 student, and with the young grade 9. So that seemed kind of strange, but it was all right. I learned a lot in that, you know, one of the things I can remember, when you cook macaroni, you always rinse it after you cook it, and that was something I didn't know. So that was enlightening to hear that, and today I can appreciate.
Something else of interest is that Pauline's uncle, was Doc Watson.
Dr. Claude Watson, yes.
Okay, and he's one of the very first doctors of western Nebraska. And if you Google him, you could read a lot about him on the internet. And they have a very famous ranch in western Nebraska called the Watson Ranch that was very well known for the 5 windmills that were on the
7 windmills.
7 windmills on the hill
And the Hereford cattle.
in their Hereford Cattle Ranch.
Yes.
This is taken on January 5th. 3 weeks shy of Pauline's 98th birthday. Thank you very much, Pauline.
Thank you, Cindy.